Athletic director, I had the chance to recruit Jack Hartman. He was one of 3 coaches that I had selected. I had heard about him when I visited Oklahoma State out of high school, and he was a great football player at Oklahoma State, and more so than he was basketball. But anyway, I had followed him from when he was coaching Southern Illinois. He was my first choice, but to get him to make a decision, we had him visit Kansas State, I bet a dozen times. And every time that we'd have him, we'd eat at our home. And Bonnie, I think, won over Jack Hartman because of her cooking. And
that first year was pretty tough. Jack was, if a kid didn't do what he was supposed to do, he was gone, and there was, that happened. And so people weren't too happy that first year. But by the end of the year, it was okay.
These were players that had played for Cotton, and one of the guys came back and was kind of, not in very good shape. That summer maybe didn't work out. Hair was fairly long and had a band around his head, like now you see those. And that was the first thing Jack said was, hey, get that band off your head and don't ever bring that back to practice. He said, I want to see any bands or, rings, or let's get that straight right now.
If you talk to his ex-players, he was tough to play for. He was tough in practice, he was tough in games. He didn't compromise what he wanted from his players. He knew exactly what he wanted, and he fit guys into the system. And I think that's what made him great and made the K-State program great, because he knew exactly what he wanted at every moment in the game, at practice, off the court, and he expected that from guys. And if he didn't get it, they paid the price.
I took a shot late in the game when we should have held the ball. I made the basket, but I never forgot about it because he was in my stuff. And rightfully so. The game had been won. We should have just held onto the ball, and that was a big learning moment for me.
You had everybody always about 10 minutes away from transferring schools, but after it was all over, then we see the method to his madness and appreciate, how tough he was and how hard he worked at being tough, and how he demanded us to do it a certain way. And it was very difficult to figure it out at the time.
I was picking up a friend after Christmas break at the airport. His plane was late. As a result of that, we missed the morning practice. That wasn't a good thing to do. So after, I think we had like a 2-hour afternoon practice, tough practice. We were doing 2-a-days then. After practice in Ahern Fieldhouse, he had us run 50 laps, which I think may have been close to, 8 miles or something like that?
He was one of the most intimidating men I've ever been around, just with his presence. Whether you saw him off the court, whether you saw him on the golf course, not physically in stature, I just mean with his demeanor, but he was difficult to play for because he was a perfectionist. His job was to correct your mistakes and not compliment what you do well. And I was, as a junior college player coming in here, I've said this, I got one compliment in 2 years. Demanded the best from you every single day, without question. One of the greatest coaches ever and teachers to ever teach this game.
Jack, at his practices, which he seldom got into, but occasionally you could sneak in, never had a whistle. It was, the practice was the squeak of tennis shoes on the floor, but he had that silent, piercing, screaming stare that said volumes to any player that was ever the victim of it.
And he did it even to the media as much as he did to his own 2 players. He could just give you that look. You could ask him a question. He could just look at you without saying anything, and you knew you got to be careful here.
Jack had this, put his hand on his hips, and he just wouldn't say anything. And so everybody, over time, the Jack Hartman stare became quite a characteristic, and if you were a player, you didn't want to get that stare.
When you were in his presence, he commanded the room. He'd walk in and he would immediately grab the attention of all the eyes. That's the kind of guy he is. I wouldn't call him aw shucks at all. The crafty part, absolutely. I think he was a guy who he could out-coach almost everybody that K-State would match up against. And I think K-Staters took kind of a solace in the fact that they knew they had Jack Hartman on their bench. They had a chance to win that game that night.
I don't think a group of guys played together as well as Jack Hartman's Wildcats. And it was certainly an example when they got great players like Chucky Williams, like Mike Evans, like Rolando Blackman. He was able to piece those individuals together with guys who were ready to get down and get dirty, the Tyrone Adams, the Ed Nealys, people like that, and put together not just 5, but 12 young men that could thrive together in a team fashion. And it was like taking a hand. You know, you have an open hand. If you strike somebody with 5 open fingers, it's not going to hurt as much as if you close it up, and it's a fist. Well, that's what he did. He created that fist, and they attacked Mizzou and Kansas University and other teams and beat them quite handily.
I think the thing that most K-State people appreciated about his ball clubs were just how well schooled they were. They rarely turned the ball over. They valued every possession. They knew the difference between a good shot and a bad shot. And even above that, I think Jack had that innate ability to take 1 or 2 star players and have 5 or 6 guys around those guys that knew their role at 150% level.
Because family was so important to Rolando Blackman, that's why he bought into Jack Hartman's family philosophy. And Rolando Blackman just felt like he was part of the team. He did not think that he was bigger or better than anyone else. And that's why he could make an impact in a game, whether he scored 10 points and had 3 rebounds or scored 22 points and had 12 rebounds. Obviously, I think we had a little more success when he was doing the 25 and 12 routine.
I think anytime you talk to somebody who was anywhere associated with the K-State program in the late 70s and early 80s, or was even a fan, the dominant image was Rolando hitting the baseline jumper against Oregon State in the NCAA tournament.
One of the greatest things about watching that highlight is how Coach Hartman reacts to that shot. Calm down, we got basketball to play. And that really is a great moment. If you want to understand Jack Hartman, go look at that highlight from beginning to end, and you'll understand what Jack Hartman was all about.
And there was another game at Hearn Fieldhouse that we lost, and Rolando gave everything he had, scored 20 points, had 10 rebounds, had something like 8 assists, but we lost the game. And Rolando was in there with his head down, just looking just absolutely exhausted. And Jack came walking into the room because we had just done the Kansas State coaches show, and he's looking around, and Jack's in a bad mood too because his team lost. And he goes, Rolando! Rolando jumps up and runs over and says, yeah, coach, and he goes, you did a great job today, and looked him right in the eye. And that picked him up. And the other players saw that even though in a losing effort, these